Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Tuesday, May 28th, 2024. For tonight's broadcast, we're talking about one of my favorite subjects. We're going to talk about ego and soul. I think for me, it's another way of talking about two primary energies in our lives and I think it gives some idea about the work that we all have to do in this process. And I really love this subject and I'm continuing to learn about it. So I'm excited to share with you what I know tonight. Before I get into that, I just want to make the announcement again for all of you who haven't heard that for our current wilderness families, for our current wilderness parents, we are now offering, as a part of your child's enrollment, we are offering the Finding You Online Intensive. Ever had no excuse to do this kind of work, now is the time. This is the online version is a 2.5 day, so you're going to miss minimal work. It starts on a Friday afternoon and ends on a Sunday evening. So we've taken care of the time, minimal time away from work. It's now included as part of your wilderness package. And we're offering you this opportunity to do a deep dive into your own history, into your own past, into your own issues. Most importantly, to understand how your background and the programming that comes from it might be contributing to your unhappiness, be contributing even to the dynamics in your family that you don't want to see, that you don't want to continue. So, Finding You Online is that option for our current wilderness families, current wilderness parents. If you would rather attend an in-person intensive, you want that experience. It's double the length. It's in our Midway Park City area location. If you want to do that, you can apply the cost of the online intensive towards your Finding You in person. So only good news today. A couple of other announcements. I'm going to be in New York City. The only Finding You that I personally will be running in 2024 will be in the New York City area, July 31st through August 4th. So if you've thought about it and you live in the tri-state area, now is the time, July 31st through August 4th. This will sell out. We haven't advertised it anywhere else except for on these broadcasts. So if you're listening, this is your opportunity. And also the other thing that I'm going to be doing this year in the fall, in September, is I'm going to be hosting again the next iteration of the Finding Connection workshop. That's with me and my wife. So my wife and I will be hosting 4 couples in our Park City location area. And this is a multi-day workshop. If you've been to Finding You, it's very similar. The curriculum is very similar. But what I like about the couples connection, the couples workshop, is that you get to witness your partner's work. And that's really important because it really does a wonderful job of translating things that you're frustrated about with your partner to a compassionate perspective on your partner. So these aren't for high conflict couples. That would be more of the custom intensives. But if you want to come and participate in the program, if you've thought about coming together, if you want to do your own work in front of your partner, this is your opportunity. Michelle and I will be running it in the fall of this year. So contact intensives at Evoke Therapy for any of these offerings. Now with the broadcast, ego and soul, the first thing that I want to share with you is this idea that I want to define what they are. Right? You can't find an ego. It's not located in the brain. The ego is the energy within us, the drive within us that kind of manages what we want to do, what we're driven to do by our urges and our impulses, and what society thinks that we should do, the rights and the wrongs, the shoulds and the shouldn'ts. And so the ego is that manager that stands in between those two other energies, the superego and the id, and kind of finds a compromise. But one of the things that the ego does also is it maintains this sense that you are good, right? It's that when I talk about consistently in the work that I do, that we have to learn to let go of that idea, that need to be good in order to be in relationship with our children or our partners in a more profound way. That's the ego's job, is to maintain that you are good. And one of the ways that the ego does that is it creates defenses, denial, repression, regression, projection. And there's a whole host of other defense mechanisms where the ego tells us, I'm not that. I'm not who I really am. I only have good intentions with my child. I don't really yell at my children. I'm a good this or a good that. That's the ego's job, is to maintain that sense that we are okay. But the ego is willing to do some pretty radical things in the service of being good, including things like denial, just absolutely unconsciously burying true aspects of ourselves. Soul, on the other hand, this took me some time because I grew up in a religious context. And in a religious context, when you talk about soul, you're talking about some sort of spirit or ghost that lives in this body, right? This idea that when you die, that the soul is the thing that lives on. But in this context, the context of psycho development theory, the idea is that the soul is our whole self, our genuine self, often referred to as the authentic self, the real self, but really it's just the truth about who we are, all of us, much of which is unconscious. Carl Jung, who used this language, is famous. One of his famous sayings is, "I would rather be whole than good," and that really sets the idea, the intention for the rest of the broadcast. The goal in psychotherapy, of course, is integration, becoming who you are, finding self-compassion, self-love, self-acceptance, and dealing with who you are. When we want to just be good, again, we split off. The ego splits off into the unconscious, those parts of us that others find unacceptable, that we find unacceptable because of our conditioning and our programming. The danger, of course, of that kind of splitting off, that kind of repression, is that those forces, those energies, those aspects of ourselves become quite toxic in the dark, if you will. So you might perceive yourself being a sensible, ethical, selfless person. You might not have a concept of ways that you don't match up to those ideals. And when that happens, the things that you end up doing to people can be particularly cruel. You might think you're a parent who has only good intentions for your child. And as you progress in your therapy work, you realize that a lot of parenting comes from protecting your sense that I'm a good parent. That I need to be good. I have to be good to be worthy. And furthermore, it makes it hard to relate to me. It makes it hard to be in relationship to a person whose ego is managing at that level. So when we talk about the idea of the psyche, the self, we're talking about the soul. The soul, and what has happened in religious context, the soul has become this metaphor for this deep, real, and whole self. And the goal in psychotherapy, as we think about it at Evoke, is to become whole. Now, the scary part is those parts of you that you have split off because you have been taught that they are unacceptable, at first are incredibly terrifying. If I have to own my selfish part, my angry part, my narcissistic parts, my defensive parts, if I have to own those parts, the fear is that by owning them, by kindly considering them, that they will take over. But it's just the opposite. The more that we can integrate who we are, the less that those forces, those energies are controlling us. The more in denial that we are of those aspects of ourselves, the more that those things are really driving our behaviors unconsciously. So really the goal is to become more conscious, and to become more conscious, you have to develop self-compassion. You have to learn to distinguish between what is something that serves the ego, the part of you that needs to be good, and what is something that serves the soul, the part of you that is your authentic, wisest, real self. Joseph Campbell once drew a figure, which I have displayed on the screen here. It actually is a tattoo that I have. I wear this tattoo all the time. And he basically, for those of you that are just listening, I'll describe it to you. He basically drew on the board a circle. And he said this circle represents the soul, essentially. All of us, all of who we are. And then he drew a line across the center of the circle, just about 2/3 of the way up. So about 1/3 of the circle and 2/3 of the circle are split by this line. He said this line is the line between the conscious and the unconscious. And in the conscious part of it, he drew a little square. He said this square represents the ego. That's our conscious knowing, what we know, who we think we are. And then he drew a round circle in the center of the circle, which was beneath that line, in the unconscious. And he offered the idea, this is who we really are. And then I take this to suggest that part of psychotherapy is the goal of psychotherapy is to move that line lower and lower over the course of our life, to become more aware of ourselves, more conscious of ourselves. And you know, Jung said there is no coming to consciousness without pain. And I have taught you many times that as you get healthier, often the people around you are going to think that you're doing the wrong thing and that you yourself will feel guilty. So we begin to understand with this model of the soul, the totality of who we are, the real self, and the ego, that conscious part of ourself that is managing what is allowed, what is acceptable. We start to understand what our work is, and we start to ask ourselves, am I operating from a place of ego, or am I operating from soul? Campbell said that the purpose of the heroic journey that I talk about in the journey of the heroic parent and the audacity to be you, that the purpose of the heroic journey, illustrated in our myths, is to describe a transformation of consciousness. The kind of change he is talking about is more than any new skill or tool can provide. This shift is fundamental. It's a different way of being. This transformation is even beyond an explanation. It is difficult to put it into words or to explain it to another person, which is why it is often illustrated through stories or examples, symbols. The story, or in Campbell's work, specifically the myth, shows us how it would look and sound if we experienced this change in ourselves. The lessons from the prophets are vertical rather than horizontal. In other words, the prophets see different layers of life. They don't offer us, he says, necessarily a history lesson or a glimpse into the future. They provide us with a deeper meaning to our lives. So phrases in Campbell's observations like God and heaven, those are all symbols of this transformation of consciousness. Like the Eastern religions teach, he says that essentially that the idea of God is this transcendent place that every human can arrive at. Right? That's what the Buddhists and the Eastern religions talk about and teach. That God is all of it. This is all the universe. And we are merely just one aspect of that. And heaven is a place that you arrive at when you've transcended the thoughts, the context, the ideas that are presented by the culture. You get to a place of peace that is beyond and independent of what's going on outside of you, because you have fundamentally changed. Now, that's a lot of big words, a lot of psychobabble for many of you. But what this really means is that this invitation at Evoke is an invitation to come to know yourself, to come to know who you are, both for the child that's in treatment and also for the parent, for the couple that comes to an intensive, for the family that comes to an intensive, or for the individual that comes to one of our Finding You. The goal is to know your own soul, to know who you are, to come to terms with it. I had a friend, I've shared this many times, who did some of this work on his own, where he just sat in front of a mirror, literally sat in front of a mirror and said, I'm going to ask myself questions, or questions of myself, about why I'm doing what I'm doing in my life. And I'm going to muster the courage to answer these questions honestly. When I was a newer therapist doing this same work many years ago, I would often give a speech or talk or one of these broadcasts, and I would get emails, or people would come up to me after the talk and they would say, after listening to you, I feel such a profound sense of shame or guilt because I'm not living up to the ideals that you're describing, which was really troubling for me in those early days. Now, part of that shifted as I began to be more open about my own story, my own fallibilities, my own humanness. As I gave example after example where I'm still struggling with the very skills, tools, and ideas, concepts that I'm teaching, and that we all do. And again, that's an example that I'm trying to model, that it's not about getting better or being good. I know that's how people think about psychotherapy and therapy in general. This model says it's not about being better and good. It's about becoming more of who you were in the first place. And if the goal is to be better or good, that can be an ego drive. In other words, your mind will trick you into think that you're doing better and good, that you've overcome this or that neuroses, this or that problem, this or that behavior. But if you have the courage to be honest with yourself, no matter what the answer is, no matter what the idea is, you'll come to know the more and more that you grow, the more that you evolve, the more therapy work that you do, you'll come to recognize and make friends with your, what I call your horrible, rotten self, which is just your human, fallible, beautiful, imperfect self. I shared with you that circle that Campbell had made to illustrate this relationship between the soul, the authentic self, and who you are. And I've listed the specific parts on this. You can always ask for copies of these slides or any of the slides if you want to by emailing us at webinar@evoketherapy.com. So the goal in psychotherapy is to become conscious. And that's not an intellectual exercise. That's a spiritual journey. That's having the courage to accept the most difficult answers and to go against what you've been taught. Really, enlightenment is much more about unlearning than it is about learning new concepts, tools, and skills. It's about unlearning the things that you were taught about what it meant to be a person, what it meant to be a parent, what it meant to be a friend or a partner. The poet Rumi said, one of my favorite quotes of all time, the poet Rumi said, "The desire to know your own soul will end all of the desires." And I've had that experience. In the moments that I'm most connected to myself, sometimes this can be expressed in terms of the inner child, which is the person that I was before the world had its way with me. It's not exactly the same and synonymous with soul and with self, but it's close. The more I'm in connection and contact with that part of me, the more at peace I am. I'm not lonely anymore. I'm not looking for somebody else to fill some hole, to make me happy. I'm not looking for a child or a partner to fill up my cup. It is full in the moment. James Hollis said it this way. He said, the truth about intimate relationships, this is critical. The truth about intimate relationships is that they can never be any better than our relationship that we have with ourselves. So the goal, mom and dad, the goal, partner, husband, wife, the goal, friend, the goal, child, sibling, the goal is to work on the relationship with yourself. If you have a difficulty with a co-parenting relationship, if you have an adult child who appears to be wayward for you, and you invite them into a therapeutic process, which is fine to do, and for whatever reason they refuse to do it, go do your own work. Not because you're going to learn tricks and hacks, but it's because that as you become aligned with who you are, the anxiety will dissipate. The depression will melt away. And you'll find a sense of transcendent peace that isn't dependent upon how well your child is doing, how well your partner is doing. It doesn't mean that you won't experience grief and pain and sadness and hurt, because those are all parts of a whole person also. It just means that you will find peace as you deal with those things, that you'll find meaning as you deal with those things. And of course, the simple example is, if you are hurting or sad or grieving, it only means that you love, that you care. So to cut out or split off the part of you that hurts or the part of you that is grieving, you also will lose the part of you that loves. In this theme, and I borrowed these from several different, and I could talk about this for days. At the Temple of Apollo in Athens, Greece, they have 3 quotations, and the first and foremost quotation is simply "Know thyself." Shams Tabrizi, the teacher of Rumi's spiritual teacher, said that the summary of the advice of all the prophets is this: find yourself a mirror. And the Gospel of St. Thomas, which was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls in the late 1940s. And when we found the Dead Sea Scrolls, we noticed that some of the Gnostic Gospels, as they're referred to, that they sounded a lot more like Eastern religion than the Western religion that comes through in the canon of Scripture that Christians and Jews use. That it sounded more like the things that we're talking about today. And in the Gospel of St. Thomas, it says, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you did not bring forth will destroy you. The idea, and this applies to you, it applies to your children, is this: that part of the reason that your children are self-medicating, part of the reason that they're experiencing such distress, part of the reason they might be cutting on themselves, part of the reason why they have social anxiety is because they're not in relationship to their authentic, their real self, to their soul, to their psyche, which is the Greek word for soul. So all of the work that we talk about is coming to know yourself, coming to relate to yourself, seeing yourself as you are, coming to terms with it. And like my therapist will say now and again to me, the news in psychotherapy, and she says this with a smile and a chuckle, she says the news in psychotherapy just gets worse and worse. The more you do it, the more human you realize that you are. The less therapy that you have, the common response or reply or self-evaluation is that I'm good. I'm good. I'm a good person and I do good things. And the soul knows that that's true, but that's just a part of you. Sometimes you don't. Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom is a quote from Aristotle. Like I said, know thyself is from the Temple of Apollo, from the Oracle of Delphi, quoting the Oracle of Delphi. The philosopher Kierkegaard said, the most common form of despair is not being who you are. And the audacity to be you, the book that I've written, I wrote it this way. I said, in this way of thinking, speaking of what I was writing in the book, you don't get to be right anymore, but you do get to be a self. And being a self is so much better. And lastly, the last reference I have is from the book, The Knight in Rusty Armor, that we ask essentially all of our clients that are in our programs to read. It's an allegory about the discovery of self. And it's with this knight who has a relationship with Merlin, who is his guide. And at one point, he calls upon Merlin in distress, and Merlin appears magically as he promised he would. And before the knight even poses his question, Merlin, the magician, starts to answer the knight's question. And the knight pauses Merlin and said, are you also capable of reading minds along with all of your other magical powers? And Merlin chuckles and says simply, since I know myself, I know you. That's the secret to this. Carl Jung said, if you want to understand somebody's darkness, know your own darkness. That is the best method, he said. So the answers to the problems, in fact, the problems themselves, are in here. I'm not suggesting your child's not struggling. Your child is definitely struggling if they're in our program. But I'm suggesting that the puzzle, the answers that you seek are in you. That's the whole name of the word. That's where the name of Voc therapy comes from. We're going to draw out from you wisdom that is just hidden from you. And it's going to be uncomfortable, and it's going to be scary, and it's going to produce guilt, and people aren't going to like it. If it was easy, everybody would do it. But it's not. It's painful. It's difficult. The pace is slower than you think. I've written many times that I think the greatest obstacle to psychotherapy isn't the stigma, it's the pace. The pace is slow. Heinz Kohut, the man that developed the idea of self-psychology, one of the psychodynamic psychology, said, Jamie Gill quoted him as saying, Kohut thought that the goal of psychotherapy was to become an ordinary, suffering human being. That is, be real. And really, if you pay attention to the myths, I was just watching a really bad movie the other night with my wife. And it was silly and ridiculous, and doesn't matter what it was. But even in that silly movie, the journey of the protagonist, the heroic journey of the protagonist, was to become a more authentic version of themselves. It is the story over and over again. The hero usually doesn't get in these stories the thing that they set out for. But what they get is a different version of themselves. And with that different, deeper, more authentic version of themselves, there's more love to give. There's more compassion for others. There's less judgment. And again, I want to explain this to you. If you give from a place of ego, you are a good parent. I want to be a good parent. Just think of that phrase. A good person donates to charity. A good person does this. Now, it might be argued that those are still good things regardless of the motive. But in our spiritual journeys, if you're doing it to be good, to be a good such and such, you're doing it from a place of ego. You're doing it from a place of fear. You're doing it to serve that need for you to be good. And really, in this model, the only way to do good is to do it from a place of soul, to do it from a place of love. It's like what Rumi said, out beyond right doing and wrongdoing, there's a field, I will meet you there. It's like what Nietzsche taught when he said, the goal is to kill the dragon of should and should not. I know it sounds strange. I know it sounds counterintuitive. But this is what 30 years of doing this has taught me, has shown me, not just as a psychotherapist, but as a patient in psychotherapy. That the greatest barriers to our happiness are the ideas of right and wrong and good and bad. And when we can deconstruct those ideas, really pull them apart and look at what's there, we start to see that so much of it is about ego. And when we surrender the need or the drive to be good, that's the only time that we're really capable of love, because then it's not in service of us. Then it's not in service of the ego. James Hollis wrote, "To become a person does not necessarily mean to be well-adjusted, well-adapted, approved of by others. It means that you become who you are. We are meant to become more eccentric, more peculiar, more odd. We are not meant to just fit in. We are here to be different. We are here to be the individual." And here's the great irony. Another quote from Rumi, where he said, "I searched for God and found only myself, and then I searched for myself and found only God." What he's alluding to is this, that once you become this individual, once you find your own soul, find out who you are, see all the parts of yourself, and no one really arrives at all of it, but as it becomes more and more complete, you recognize how connected you are to everybody and everything. That's why some of the gurus talk about there is no self, and some of them talk about there is a self. This is where it comes together. Once you realize who you are, there's a saying in Buddhism that you're not a drop in the ocean, but you're the ocean in a drop. That you are the universe embodied, that you are, like Alan Watts says, and many people say, you are the universe made conscious, observing itself. You are part of it all. Like the great philosopher Charles Eisenstein says, who talks a lot about sustainable energy and climate change, that when we hear about things like the coral reef dying off, the reason that it hurts us is because it's happening it's happening in part to us, to our extended self. We are connected to all of life. We have more compassion. We have more love. We are so grounded in our own values and what matters to us. But the lines between us become quite diffuse. We see ourselves in everybody. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist monk, said, meditate until you see yourself in the most vile sinner. Until the most despicable despot. And when you find those parts of yourself that you were told to fear, the only thing that's left is love. A more contemporary quote is from David Bowie. He said, "Aging is an extraordinary process where you become the person you always should have been." Part of what I want to talk about tonight is something called ego death. And I'll start with this quote from Carl Jung. He said, "The spiritual journey is not a career or a success story. It is a series of small humiliations of the false self that become more and more profound." Richard Rohr, also a psychodynamic teacher and writer, written some wonderful books, also a Catholic priest, wrote, "I have prayed for years for one good humiliation a day, and then I must watch my reaction to it. I have no other way of spotting both my denied shadow self and my idealized persona." In other words, he prays for this humiliation as an exercise to become more of who he is and to kill that part of him, that ego part of him that is protecting this fragile image of what a person should be. This is coming from a Catholic priest. This is from someone who teaches piety, but he's found a way, he's found a wonderful way to marry both his religious belief system and the Jungian psychology, the ideas from Campbell. This is an interesting idea from D.W. Winnicott, also one of the historic figures in these theories of attachment and psychodynamic theory and psychological development. He said it's the false self or the ego. It's the false self that brings the real self into therapy. I call it Trojan horse therapy sometimes. What we think therapy is when we start, it becomes something different altogether. And while you might be listening to me right now because you have a child struggling with mental health or addiction, and your mind tells you that's the problem, and it's definitely something to be addressed, to be looked at. So your mind focuses on that and the questions that surround that. But what happens after a while is you realize that the identified patient is not the patient, that you are the patient. And you shift from believing that the way to find peace and serenity, to find heaven, if you will, that it's not in figuring out how to get the child back on path and steer them in the way that you think they ought to go. That is a wonderful, wonderful joy and a wonderful blessing in life. But you begin to realize that the relationship that you've had with yourself, your own unexplored trauma, and I'm not talking about big T dramatic trauma, I'm talking about the lessons that made sense to you growing up. You start to realize that those are the things that stand between you and this place referred to by poets and prophets as heaven, this place of transcendence, this place of peace, this baseline that you are okay. Ego operates on fear. Ego is a protective energy. Ego sees others as separate. Ego likes to compare, right? It's a scarcity mindset. It's a zero-sum game, meaning that if I win, you lose. There's always a +1 and a -1. It always adds up to 0. Ego looks at the neighbor, looks at what the Joneses are doing. Ego is the part of us that feels and holds the stigma for psychotherapy, for mental health issues. Ego seeks validation from anyone and everyone. Ego enters into the therapeutic process or to therapy to try to control life. And ego does the right thing, does what it's told. Soul, on the other hand, operates from a place of love. Soul gives from a place of abundance. I talk about this all the time, that when you move from the ego-driven self to the soul-driven self, you move away from giving because it's the right thing to do to giving because you have an abundance to give, because you have love to give, because it feels good to give. That love is its own reward, that virtue is its own reward. Soul sees others as equals and sees our connection to others. I have said for many years that new clients in our program will often point out the differences. This guy's using drugs. This guy stole from his grandparents. This guy did X or Y or Z. This girl did. They respond that way. As they grow, they will say things to each other like, "I'm not like her in that I didn't fight with my parents and yell, but I lied. And so lying was my drug. Lying was the way that I manipulated." Yes, he or she might use a more serious drug than I ever used, but self-harm was my drug, was my escape. See, we start to see the fundamental similarities that we all carry. Soul knows who it is. Soul, there's this idea that when you get seen by one person, either as a young child or later in life through a psychotherapeutic process or one like it, that you don't spend your entire life trying to be seen by everybody. And what I'm describing is that soul knows itself. One of the mantras I tell myself when I'm feeling socially anxious is, Brad, you know who you are. You know who you are. You've been working on this for a lot of years, and you know who you are. And that doesn't mean that you're good. That just means you're all of it. Sometimes good, sometimes bad, sometimes wise, sometimes ignorant, sometimes generous, sometimes stingy. You know yourself. Soul finds peace regardless of outside circumstances. Soul is peace. Soul does the right thing no matter what they are told. Soul is transcendent. Soul is larger. Soul is expansion. Soul is wholeness. I love these two quotes. One of them's a quote. One of them's a series, an art piece that would sit in my therapist's office on the wall for many years. The first one is from Ram Dass. He said, a lot of people try to counteract the I am not good enough with I am good enough. In other words, they take the opposite, they try to invest it. But that still keeps the world at the level of polarities. The art is to go behind the polarities. So the act is to go to, not to go to the world of I am good, to counteract I am bad, or to go to I am lovable as opposed to I am unlovable, but to go behind it to I am. And I am includes the fact that I do crappy things and I do beautiful things, and I am. And that includes everything that I am. This is what he's describing. This is what the gurus and the spiritual teachers are teaching. It gets translated poorly sometimes by the masses to be a lot of shoulds and rights and wrongs and goods and bads. But what they're teaching is this is the way that it works. It's not you should be good. It's when you're operating from a place of safety and knowing you operate this way. This list of words, it's entitled Words of Higher Enlightenment, stood on my therapist's wall for many years. And the list, for those of you who can't see it, I'll just read a part of it. The words includes words like drop out, fail, quit, lose, relax, give in, flunk, let go, empty, surrender, wait, give over, mellow out, slow down, don't, forget, submit, fade away, relinquish, withdrawal, flop, yield, back out. And it took me a long time. I never talked about this with her as I saw it on the wall as I was waiting for the sessions. It took me a long time to recognize, because the way that the art is made, that the title of this poster is Words of Higher Enlightenment. Because this is what enlightened people talk about. See, enlightened people can apologize. When Gandhi was approached, this is depicted in the movie about him, played by Ben Kingsley. In this particular scene, this is when Candace Bergen was the reporter from Time Magazine, I believe it was, who was interviewing him and doing a piece on his life. Somebody came up to Gandhi with a grievance that he didn't know about. Very, very hostile. And his response was, I must have done something to hurt you. I must have done something. I'll look at that. If you're operating from a place of soul, you're bigger. You can apologize. You can own your mistakes. There's no need for the defense anymore, because you've accepted, you've embraced more of the totality of who you are. And part of how this is accomplished is being in therapy with somebody that's different than our parents. J.D. Gill wrote, the experience of seeing one's base from a different perspective can be profound. One way this happens, she said, is by allowing ourselves to be honest and open with someone who does not react the way that our parents did. For example, what was very bad at home is now nothing. The difference in experience allows for the realization that things could be different. One's assigned position in one's past is not necessarily one's assigned position in the universe. Lastly, I want to bring us to something really practical that is talked about, called ego death, specifically in the context of parenting. Let me take you through these 3 slides to share with you. When the shame or pain of a failure, trauma, feedback that you get from a child, or a new awareness hits us, we have a fundamental choice. The first option, driven by shame and ego, is to defend the ego and run away from the relationship. The second option is to allow for a small ego death, tolerating feelings of discouragement, deflation, and despair. We just keep going, resisting the impulse of moving away from relationship. The first choice confirms the child's greatest fear, that they, the child, are too much, and that sharing their feelings or causing the parent too much pain will result in abandonment. The second choice results in personal transformation and enlargement. Here, the child learns that the parent can be relied on as a safe base. As we chip away at the ego, as it dies piece by piece, we make ourselves available to more authentic and transcendent relationships. If you're still at the place where you're defending the mistakes that you made and the stories that your child is telling about you, you're coming from a place of ego. You're resisting. If you were big enough, if you knew who you were, not only would you give space for that complaint, that feedback of the mistake, you would probably use that feedback to grow and to improve. You would demonstrate to the child or to the partner that you are an adult, that you are a whole person. So part of the goal at the end of all of this is to work on that ego, letting it die, letting it get smaller. One of the reasons why psychedelic assisted drugs work so well to improve our awareness is that they temporarily paralyze the ego. When we go to sleep at night, the reason that our dreams, which are the unconscious truth, come out is because our ego is asleep. If you're doing equine assisted psychotherapy, one of the things that they might have you do is ride on a horse bareback. And while you're doing that, they'll talk to you. What does this have to do with anything? Well, when you're riding bareback on a horse, if you're not very experienced, probably even if you are, I'm not, you have to really concentrate. Your ego is fully engaged. Your conscious mind is fully engaged in staying on that horse and not following up. And so what happens is your defenses are lowered. Everything I've done, everything I've learned, all the parents that I've worked with, the books that I've read, the books that I've written, the almost 1,700 broadcasts that I've performed in this role have brought me to this idea that the goal is to shed layers of the ego, to get rid of the idea of being good, being right, of winning, and becoming who we really are. And I will tell you from personal experience, both observing it in others that I get to watch go through this process, but also most importantly, the sweet feeling that comes to my own soul, my own self, is that as I take steps or make steps along this journey, everything is answered. I don't have magic hacks or shortcuts to fix your problems or to fix my own children's problems. I don't. But I find peace more and more in the present moment. And from that place, I'm a better father. I'm a better friend. I have available all of my creativity. I'm not bound by fear, by fight or flight, knee-jerk reaction. I have what the psychologists refer to as response flexibility. I can operate with more capacity. But to do that, I have to love myself. I have to be willing to say no, to set boundaries, to follow through on consequences and promises, even when people get angry at me. And they can get angry at me because I'm okay. I don't need them to not be angry at me. I don't need them to think I'm a good friend or a good father or a good partner. Because I've come to terms with the fact that I am all of it. All of it. And I know you because I know me. Everything if you're listening, if you're watching, and you find anything that I say valuable or helpful, it is in large part because of this process of ego death, this process of expansion, this humiliation, this bad news that keeps coming throughout the years. That's what I really have to offer you. All right, folks. Thank you for that. A couple of announcements upcoming. We ask all current parents to attend 6 of any of the following 12-step support groups: Al-Anon.org, CODA.org, FamiliesAnonymous.org, or AdultChildren.org. You can also go to Refuge Recovery, which is a Buddhist-inspired recovery program, or you can go to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI.org, to find free classes and resources in your local community. Evoke Therapy Programs has recently partnered with Other Parents Like Me, often referred to as the acronym OPLM. Other Parents Like Me is an online platform built on the foundation of parents supporting parents. They provide 17 weekly Zoom meetings designed for caregivers of teens and young adults facing mental health challenges, led by trained peer parent facilitators. If you want to try it out, you can use the code Finding You, all one word, Finding You. Go to the OPLM website, register there, and you can get 1 month premium membership for free. Just try it out for free. See if it doesn't boo you up, support you, add confidence and clarity to you. My 2 books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon or Audible. You can also click the QR code on the screen if you're watching. I also have the audio versions of it available on Audible, as I mentioned. If you want to come and do a deep dive into your own work, I don't think of I can't give you an idea that I know of that would add more to your life, to your parenting, to your coupleship than a Finding You workshop. The next available one is June 19th through 23rd. It might be full. It was teetering on full today, but check it out. Get on the waiting list. July 24th after that. And then August 14th through 18th. Like I mentioned earlier, I will be in New York City running the Only Finding You of 2024 personally, July 31st through August 4th. If you live in the tri-state area, check it out. If you want to visit New York City in the summer, tag this on to the front or the end of your trip and see the sights and see Broadway. Our next online workshop will be June 21st through 23rd. That's the 3-day online version I mentioned earlier. For custom Finding Connection, couples and co-parents workshops, or Finding Family, go to email us at intensives@evoketherapy.com. Go to our website or click the QR code there. Also, my wife and I will be running the Couples Connection workshop, the Finding Couples, in the fall. So check that out. We have support groups for current and alumni parents of our adolescents. June 17th is that offering, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Actually, that's the alumni only. Olivia, will you go to our website and type in when the next parent meeting is for our current alumni parents? Once a month, we have an alumni only meeting. June 17th is that offering, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. We have an intensives and coaching support group once a month. If you're an intensives or a coaching alumni or current client, June 10th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time is that offering. Email us at supportgroups@evoketherapy.com. Go to our website or click the QR code there. If you would like a therapist or a coach that you want to work with virtually, you can email us at coaching@evoketherapy.com. Since the pandemic, this has been our fastest growing, largest expanding program. So you can go to our website, check it out, email us, and get set up and connected with a coach that's a good fit for you. All these broadcasts are available on Spotify or your favorite podcast app. Just go to your favorite podcast app wherever you consume podcasts, and in the search bar, write Finding You, an Evoke Therapy podcast, and then like us and subscribe us there. And whenever a new episode drops, you'll be notified. You can also go to soundcloud.com on your computer and find our Finding You podcast broadcast there. You can also go to our Evoke YouTube channel. If you want to watch these, the video rebroadcast usually come out the next day. You can watch the video rebroadcast with the slides and the video version of me talking. You can find Evoke Therapy Programs and me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on X, Threads, and Instagram, using the handles @Evoke Therapy and @Dr. Brad Reedy, respectively. You can also find Evoke Therapy Intensives on Instagram using the handle @Evoke Therapy Intensives. You can find us on Facebook by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives, or the Evoke Therapy blog has wonderful content each week. I'm going to be back in 48 hours. You can send questions to webinar@evoketherapy.com. You can always send those at any time. They'll go into the queue. for the next live broadcast. And that will be Thursday, May 30th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, live Q&A. So 48 hours from now, I'll be right back. Thanks for joining me this evening. I hope this was helpful. I hope it was a helpful point of contact for you. And as always, especially as you consider these things, for on behalf of the people that love you and the people that you love, thanks for showing up to these. Thanks for listening, and thanks for being willing to do your work. It makes all the difference in the world. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you in about 48 hours. Take care. Bye-bye.